really what I'm going to do is focus a few remarks, and I want to make sure we open up to plenty of discussion on really the importance and the challenges to entrepreneurship. I've been involved in the entrepreneurship world for the last 10 years, really. After the crash, I set up a charitable foundation called the New Entrepreneurs, really to help develop the next generation of leaders, people who could actually build billion-dollar businesses, people who actually could make a real difference to the knowledge economy. And since then, we've actually last year incorporated in us the Center for Entrepreneurs, which is a think tank really looking at some of the important aspects of entrepreneurship. And really, during that period, I've come to meet a lot of entrepreneurs. I've backed a lot of young entrepreneurs. I think about 30 so far, many of whom have come through the program which I've been running. And just in that program, just to give you a little bit of background, we've had 250 young people gone through it. We have started 130 businesses. 115 are still going. They've raised £50 million, and they've employed about 2,500 people. I'm absolutely convinced that some of them will be real game changers. And indeed, I'm excited by, I think, the real opportunity for entrepreneurship in this country, because having been around it now for so long, it's really made me recognize that the technology revolution is actually changing the world, and entrepreneurship is actually going to play a huge and important part in it. And indeed, we all know from the changes in social media and the big growth of the technology giants, they have all serious issues which we need to, and I know a lot of you will be worried and concerned about. But they're also great enablers for some of these young new businesses. So where's entrepreneurship and technology taking us? And it's taking us, I'm particularly going to focus on the entrepreneurship side, but I will just add that, from the corporate side, the advancement of artificial intelligence is certainly going to change the way in which big corporates operate, the way in which government operates, and it's going to change society. And indeed, I'm fortunate enough to basically be hosting a lecture in 6 weeks' time, where Eric Schmidt is coming over to talk. In fact, he's launching his AI foundation, and we'll be talking about how it's going to affect business and society. Coming to entrepreneurship and really seeing what's happening in this country, we're doing pretty well. If you look at the sort of, I guess, the 2013 Ernst & Young survey, we were ranked second behind the US overall. Perhaps more relevant is a more recent 2018 survey by Imperial College. And that we came out second in Europe, second only to Switzerland, and fourth globally behind the US, Canada. And what that measured was sort of, I guess, 14 components or pillars of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Risk capital, human capital, skills, cultural support, networking, et cetera, et cetera. What's interesting there is we come out extremely well in technology absorption, very weak in skills, and actually weak in the provision of risk capital. What's really interesting about entrepreneurship is not just the number of new businesses that start. Something of the order of 400,000 new businesses start every year. The real key from an economic standpoint is actually how these businesses scale. And one of the things I've been helping with and working with is the Scale Up Institute, which was set up by Ferry, who's a wonderful, successful American venture capitalist. And I'm going to lean on some of the findings of the Scale Up Institute, because it's really very critical that it's not the number of small businesses that get set up that will change the needle in terms of Britain's economic performance. It's the number of businesses that really scale. That is absolutely the critical area. And if you look at their definition, businesses that are growing employment and turnover 20% a year, just to give you a little understanding of the scale, 27,000 in 2013, 31,000 in 2015. Of these, 60% were in London and the Southeast, and around 60% in technology and financial services related. So we're doing pretty well, but what I think is critically important is to understand where are the gaps. What is it that we need to do if we're really going to actually drive the entrepreneurial revolution? And there are 5 in my mind, and 5 which the Scale Up Institute have identified. One is talent and skills, and this is probably the biggest gap. And we all know the problems of the desperate shortage of computer science graduates in the UK. And when I look at some of the young businesses that I've backed, the number of them who tell me how difficult it is to find developers, software developers, and to find coders, and to find people who actually have serious technology and computer expertise. And what are they doing? They're actually having to bring people over particularly from places like Romania, Poland, and in some cases they're actually having to set up satellite operations over there. So this is a critical problem, and if you look at what's happening in the cybersecurity area, again, there's this terrible shortage of people who actually are trained in that area, and we all know, the risks and dangers, not just for business, but generally on cyber, and so we're going to have to find a way of dealing with it. I can only tell you that there is a business starting at Bletchley Park which is going to be training cybersecurity people, and I am planning to invest in it. And indeed, there is, as I sit here speaking, I have colleagues of mine who are off to visit it today. Talent and skills, absolutely key. And one of the interesting things around that is not just the sort of technology skills gap, it's actually, if you look and talk and the survey on the problem with skills, what it identified was actually a lot of young people have an absence of social skills. And what does that actually mean? It means people who can work in a team, people who can communicate well, and those were, I think, other than the technology skill gap, the biggest next problem for scale-up businesses was the absence of people with social skills, and we need to think very carefully how do we fill that. I think the other area which is definitely critically important on this is post-Brexit. How is the immigration system going to work in terms of the skills gap? And we all know that that's a huge issue, and anyone dealing with government, I think, and certainly the conversations I've had with government, has not led me to have any confidence that they actually are going to be able to help solve that. But for a lot of businesses, not just the small entrepreneurial businesses, but some of the big businesses I deal with wearing my Korn Ferry hat, there is a real concern. Secondly, access to markets. And this is, I think, another interesting lesson which I've learned in some of the young businesses I've backed. One of the key aspects for a growing young business is often a big corporate or a big government customer. And often they will create a core customer can actually help a business scale very rapidly. And what you find is that corporates take far too long to make up their mind in their procurement. And governments, strangely enough, which were even worse, have actually improved. Would you believe it? Corporates take longer than governments. And I've certainly had 2 businesses, which I was explaining, where lots of very positive noises, very exciting, interesting, innovative businesses. A year later, the corporate just couldn't make a decision. And it had to go through so many different committees. And in both cases, both businesses said enough is enough. And 2 young entrepreneurs were left to start and find a new business. So corporates actually, I think, have a responsibility to help promote and support the supply chain, and in particular to help support young businesses. The government recognise that, and the one good thing is you'll find in government there are a lot of people in various ministries who actually are these sort of enterprise entrepreneurial champions. So much as I like to criticise government on that score, I think actually they're getting their act together. Thirdly, leadership capacity. And again, one of the problems we face is it's all very well starting businesses, but actually how well trained are people to run the businesses and operate them? And what we do in for our My Young Entrepreneurs Foundation, how do we train them? Well, it's very simple. What we do is we actually put these young people into fast-growing young businesses as the executive assistant to the chief executive and the senior management team. And guess what? They learn from the experience of actually being in there in the heat of commerce and business, seeing what happens when opportunities come along, problems, issues, how to deal with staff, customers. So it's actually very strong on-the-job training. And in addition to that, we actually give them a little mini MBA, but again, very targeted, how to scale a business, how to internationalize a business, self-awareness skills, how to build team skills, negotiation skills, digital marketing skills, so, how to raise money skills, presentation communication. I mean, very practical. And what we need, I think, is, I mean, there are lots of interesting initiatives. There's a Goldman Sachs 10,000 program. There's a Stock Exchange Elite program, which are all involved in helping to try and develop these skills for young, growing businesses. And what's really interesting is that not only do these young businesses need skills, but sort of broadening it out to the wider enterprise economy, big companies absolutely need these skills. And if I look at what Korn Ferry are doing at the moment, our biggest business is not search. It's actually helping companies drive digital transformation. So that whole skills area, both in the entrepreneurial field and actually in big business, is huge. So helping people to be leaders. Fourth, finance. And again, this is something which everyone knows. It's not just the lack of risk capital. It's also, one of the problems is the lack of awareness of risk capital. If you look at the entrepreneurial, some of the scale-up businesses, something like 40% of them only operate with equity. In other words, they're all otherwise financed by friends and family and debt. And actually, equity enables companies to scale much faster. As it happens, the government has been very good and has changed the game in terms of providing tax incentives to business angels. The SES, EIS schemes, I think, are excellent, and they've spawned a huge increase in that business angel community. The venture capital industry, again, it's growing rapidly. I think in the last 2 or 3 years, I've detected a really big uptake in venture capital investing. But again, you've got to be very careful. There's very interesting, and we've just had a company called FanDuel, one of the first UK unicorns, a Scottish company. And the business, which was financed by venture capitalists, and then it went into private equity at KKR, and was then sold recently to Paddy Power, Betfair, for around $500 million. And the original founders, based in Scotland, guess what they got for that, all the work, and they've been around for most of the time. They got absolutely zero. And the reason was they actually didn't understand the financing, and KKR and the other investors with preference shares took the lot. So you have to be very careful, you have to be aware of what's going on, and you need to, a lot of these businesses actually need to be helped with understanding how to finance their businesses. Now you've got the Business Growth Fund doing extraordinarily good work around the country. It really has, I think, been a game changer. People like the Octopus Titan funds, the venture capital funds, and the British Business Bank. And finally, infrastructure. Well, we all know there's a huge problem with the infrastructure gap not just generally as we sit around in a sort of societal and big business basis, but actually for small businesses and growing businesses, the infrastructure gap is probably even more of a problem. So super, high-speed internet. I mean, it's difficult enough to get it in London, let alone around the country. And compared with our European competitors and elsewhere, I mean, it is really, it's appalling. We all know about our transport links. I don't need to say anything else. But take office space. For fast-growing businesses, huge problems. I've got 2 businesses that have been running out of space every 18 months and trying to get the cost of moving, difficulty in finding the sufficient space. It's a nightmare, particularly in London. It all feeds back into the planning process, which, as we all, I think, know, is antediluvian and needs radical reform. The only positive development in terms of the infrastructure is that actually what a lot of the local enterprise partnerships have done, which is actually excellent, is they have encouraged a lot of clusters. So you've got a growing number of clusters, not just at Oxford and Cambridge, but around the country. And I think those clusters and business parks and have actually made a big difference. So really, in conclusion, there's a huge amount that we need to do to really drive the entrepreneurial revolution in this country. It's down to government. It's down to, I think, big business has got to play its part. One of the things which I am absolutely appalled about is the total lack of interaction between big business and the schools in particular. I think big business has started to connect with the universities, which is hugely important. But the connection with schools, I think, is lamentable. And if we are going to get young, technology-oriented young people well educated, then it's really important for big business to connect and support that process in the schools. We have a real opportunity in this country to grow UK post-Brexit and really participate in the entrepreneurial revolution. You've only got to go to see some of these young people and some of the businesses they are building to recognize how exciting it is. I have one business which I think will be a big game changer. It's called Unmind. It provides a platform to help big companies deal with mental health problems for all their employees. They've just secured the John Lewis contract, and which of course is a wonderful contract to have because John Lewis actually are very keen on helping employees. And I think they will go on to become a sort of global leading firm in that really important space. But they have issues around financing, they have issues around space, they have issues around attracting talent. It's terribly important that we can see some of these companies, which potentially I think will be game-changing, world-leading companies, progress. So my message really is that, the entrepreneurship revolution is, I think, moving forward here in the UK, but there's a huge amount more to do. Thank you.
I was chatting to Oliver a few weeks ago when we were up at the Big Tent Festival of Ideas, and as you were chatting away and we were having lunch, I thought, this man needs to come and talk to our conference, and I'm so very pleased that we met up there and did that. I'm reminded that a friend of mine who I was in the Royal Navy many years ago, and one of my friends stayed on, and he later became First Sea Lord. He's just retired, and he's started up a cyber security company. And I said to him, George, the thing is, I can't find you on the internet anywhere. You need to put together a website. And he said, James, I cannot deal with the amount of work I've got already. I don't need to advertise at all. And I thought, that's how hot, if you get in the right entrepreneurial sector, things can be. You cannot get people fast enough to do the work that people want to do. So what a wonderful thing if you start a business and that's your first experience is that type of entrepreneurialism. Entrepreneurialism is one of the things that we're looking at in GIEO very, very carefully, because it's not just that it's one of the themes that we have running through the Global Index of Economic Openness is the whole idea of exchange of ideas. Entrepreneurship is those ideas made real. but it's also, I think, extraordinarily important in terms of what it forces other companies to do. A bit like trade. What does trade do? And the advantage of trade, of course, is that it gives consumers choice, but also forces domestic companies to respond, as we were talking about in the last session. But entrepreneurship does exactly the same thing. It forces existing companies to up their game and to make sure that all of us as consumers get a better deal and a better offer. And that's something to really be valued. And I look at it now and I think we in Europe have a problem because, of course, whilst, and Oliver was saying, the UK does relatively well in entrepreneurship, but we does extremely well in comparison to much of Europe. But if we look at a table of sort of how much people are working for, companies say it started less than 3 years ago, which is the typical measure that a lot of people use for entrepreneurship. Europe populates the bottom third in the world. The UK is towards the top of that. When I'm wanting to be controversial, I sometimes say that it's like being the head of the Scottish Premiership. You're the top of the league nobody cares about. So we want to be better than that. We want to be in the top of the league that people really do care about. And that means grasping a lot of these opportunities. Now, the great thing is that lots and lots of people want to do that. And we saw that with Hernando talking about that this morning and in the way, in people across Northern Africa. But people around the world are really, really keen to do this sort of thing. But they also need to be able to just get on and do it without huge amounts of impediments. And I think that's one of the really critical things we have to grasp going forward from all of that. On the rest of the panel, we've got two people who are actually doing it in real time. I myself started a company many, many years ago. It was a bank. We did a lot of financing renewable energy. Maybe over lunch I'll tell you why it was great and why it didn't actually work in the final analysis. But that's a story for another day. But I'm going to hand straight over to Pam Bateson, and she's going to tell you all about Thrive Partners.
Thank you. So James invited me to come and talk as an entrepreneur. And so I'm just going to give you a very few headlines on the context of the business to kind of say why I'm here today and what I'd like to talk about. So my business is 3 years old tomorrow. I've had a management consultancy for 25 years. And it is an on-demand communications platform that allows any iteration of learner and teacher to be able to talk to one another. So that can be in cancer, it can be in business, it can be in any common denominator. And the purpose of it is threefold. As a mother, I'm really concerned about the fact that my children have been taught to bark at Alexa, to scream at the Xbox, and listen for the gap. And that on average, a kid touches their iPhone 2,600 times a day. I see children that can't sit around a table in a restaurant and talk to their families, and that people need tech to be able to take care of kind of how people behave in places. And so, I want to role model meaningful and memorable conversations where people know that it's okay for you to be able to sit and talk and that you don't need tech to be able to do that. But equally, loneliness is a rising epidemic. Three to five people are being seen by every GP in this country today, every day. 40% of the population expect, 1 in 5 of us today are going and talking about the fact that we feel lonely. But we're in a society where actually we're more connected than we've ever been. So we have to use tech as a way of being able to mobilize and connect people around a common denominator, and for people to kind of feel that thing that we all have to have, which is a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of vitality, and the fact that any part of our experience is relevant if we're given a forum to be able to utilize that. So we have this platform, and we have some clever tech at the back end that listens and learns to absolutely every single conversation that takes place. And the purpose behind that is, my job when I was in corporate life was as a lean engineer. And I worked in the health service and in manufacturing. And do you know what? It's really hard to work in those businesses. They're just not fit for purpose. It's too hard to do a lot of things. And so I believe we've got a responsibility to listen to all the conversations, to transcribe them, to analyse them, and to help businesses and society understand from a learner or user or an employee perspective what they must pay attention to be good enough for people to work in. Because there's no point developing your people over here if the businesses are just rubbish, right? And as an, you know, where do those things take me to as an entrepreneur that's trying to scale what many describe as a brilliant business? Well, there isn't a shortage of, you know, the difficulty isn't in getting new ideas. The difficulty is in getting and escaping some of the old ones that exist. For every contract that I win, it is taking me, apart from in fintech and fast tech, more than the cost of the first price of the contract to be able to secure it. That's bonkers. And yet I'm working with really big organisations that say we want to be agile, we want to work with startups, we want to work with scale-ups, we want to kind of adopt your methodology and your mindset. But the typical duration is 18 months for me to be able to get my platform in their business that they believe is business critical. And the other thing that we kind of share so, you know, you've kind of got the difficulty of being able to get in with new businesses. But, you know, I travelled as part of the Mayor's campaign on the London and Partners Go to Grow programme with the Mayor and did some trade missions with him last year. You know, I think there are too many good ideas that are lost. You know, 40% of entrepreneurs are surviving post 5 years. And I've sat in the rooms with some of the most incredible ideas that we cannot get to scale. And we can't get to scale them because we can't get cash flow. Cash flow is our permanent enemy. And we can't get talent. You know, I resent the fact that I've got to go to Bolivia. And, you know, so a coder in America earns 3 times more than a coder in Bolivia. Right? A Mexican, if he works in America, he'll get double the salary for his job than he will if he does his job in Mexico. I'm told to go to India to go and hire my tech resource because I can hire the tech resource at 30% of the cost of doing it in London. But entrepreneurs iterate fast. We change fast. We need agility. You need in-country, in-territory, in-house expertise. And so you kind of say, right, okay, well, we'll bring techies in. You know, we'll sit them in kind of the more developed areas. We'll kind of pay the rates that we believe a responsible employer should pay. But then we don't have the tech capability to be able to work with them. I have 230 coaches, and I've had 50 coaches that we've had to let go because they haven't got the quality of broadband in both Australia, the UK, and America to be able to get onto corporate systems or my system. And it's bonkers that broadband should be the thing that's inhibiting growth. So I think, you know, the bottom line is we can develop confidence in economies, and I think we should kind of open all labour borders. And as a lean engineer, why are we all wasting time censoring who's coming in and out of the country when actually there's no problem about terrorism and wages and all these things that we all kind of believe? They're all myths. You know, why don't we just open all the labour borders? You know, why don't we give free access to kind of labour for us all to be able to use in this territory? You know, we're 2.3 million people short of the skilled labour that we need by 2020, just in the UK. You know, so open those and address loneliness and mental health problems. We have a social responsibility to allow people to connect to one another and do good work.
I'm Tim Dempsey. Hello? Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm Tim Dempsey, not the Tim Dempsey from Epiphany Capital. They couldn't get him, but I shared the name, so here I am. So I'm a publisher. Since 2001, I have been publishing books on capital markets and sort of business issues like corporate governance and securitization and sort of financial issues. And I started doing a lot of work with stock exchanges, publishing books on how to go public, you know, sort of how to join, whether it's AIM or the NYSE or NASDAQ. I've worked with both of them and the LSE, and started seeing that really the books that I was publishing that are kind of used as marketing for the exchanges as they sit down and try and attract a business to one exchange over another were the people who are ready to go public have a line around the block of people who want to give them all of this advice. And I pitched the New York Stock Exchange on doing a book for earlier stage companies. in fact, for sort of companies that haven't even been founded. So over the past 2 years, I have been focusing entirely on doing books that are books that if you are a technologist, and I think these days a lot of the companies that we're seeing are founded by technologists, it's the type of book that sits on your desk, and as and when issues come up, whether or not it's financing issues, so you end up that you're doing a good deal term sheet with VCs, or issues regarding hiring employees or protecting intellectual property. The books are written by 50 or 60 different experts, and they kind of give these entrepreneurs a high-level view of what they should be thinking about, the right questions they should be asking. It kind of educates them up to the point that they know what to do, and it ideally connects them with well-respected practitioners in the space. So the first book that I did for the New York Stock Exchange came out 2 years ago, and it's about 300 pages, and we got everybody from Steve Case and Brad Feld and just some wonderful entrepreneurial names in the US. Just finished doing a book in Australia that had Google and all the big names out there, and we're just starting a book for the UK, so very excited to be getting started on that.
Shall we
Open to questions.
open to questions? Yes. So obviously this is one of the most exciting areas I think that we could possibly be exploring, and the UK does, as I say, very well, but I'd really like to hear questions from the audience and things, comments and thoughts. Is this the area that we should be concentrating on as much as we are? Why is Europe doesn't it do as well as it should? What's holding Europe back? I mean, as I said, the UK tends to be better than many countries in Europe, but Europe itself could do so much better. But anyway, over to thoughts and comments from the audience itself.
My observation about being able to get talent in the sector of computer engineering is that I'm the mother of two of this group, and the UK simply doesn't provide an attractive enough environment for them to want to stay here. So unfortunately, if they have any ability to get employed and get a better wage elsewhere, they're going to go there because there's more happening elsewhere, it's more impactful. The way that they work with them over there, the connectivity, the incubators, the accelerators, mean that they're whisked up, they're not just put at the coalface, they're in this.
Where's other there? Oh.
So I have one who's in I'm trying to get Ferry Valley at the minute and who's looking to get out, and one who's in San Francisco at the minute and won't be coming back.
Won't be coming back?
No, I would very much doubt it, unless he becomes an entrepreneur and decides to create his entrepreneurship back in the UK. Because as an employee, you say it's cheaper to employ somebody for Lydia, 3 times cheaper, but they want to go somewhere at 3 times, the wage is 3 times greater.
And
I'm sorry, it's not a question, it's a comment in order to provoke a discussion about that terrible tension. So back to you.
So I have a tech business, and I want the best tech talent in the world to do the thing that hasn't been done, and yet I can't pay the salaries that Silicon Valley pay. They currently pay 3 times. I was with Amazon and Google last year, and they are currently paying 3 times the common salary for techies to get the best in the world.
They're also offering equity, they're offering whole lifestyle packages, which are not being offered in the UK, and certainly which you couldn't offer to Libya. So it's a big gap, massive, broad spectrum problem.
If I can jump in.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And I actually live in San Francisco, and I can tell you that people, young people at a lot of these companies, and not maybe Google or Facebook, have taken to living in mobile homes and living in the parking lots of the companies that they work for. So I think that those days could be coming to an end. And I think that a lot of the perception about Silicon Valley and a lot of the reasons that Silicon Valley has done so well are changing. And I think the most recent headline I saw was that 40% of the people in the Bay Area are looking to leave. And when you see a 1-bedroom condominium in East Palo Alto, which is not a nice part of Palo Alto, in fact it's dangerous, selling for over $1 million, it's just unsustainable.
Well, that's also that property, food, everything, the cost of living has accelerated to, as you said, an unsustainable level. It doesn't mean that salaries aren't being pushed up to try and meet that. So it is a bubble.
And there's a real problem here in London. There's no question. A lot of these young companies find it very difficult now to get people who can afford to live in London. So, which is why this affordable home issue is such a huge issue. And you know, it's a disgrace it hasn't been properly tackled.
Well, if I make one more observation, which is that if I look at the American company, which employs one project like this, and the UK company, which is both a start-up at different stages. One is a huge start-up, and one is a very small start-up. But the American company has a much clearer idea and a much more structured way, it always did, about how to develop its talents internally. So it looks at how to hold on to it. It's having conversations from the minute you arrive about what you're going to do in your time within that company. Whereas in the UK, my view is, and I see this amongst their cohorts, that unless you're in a very sophisticated and non-startup setup, you get employed with a view to moving. Whereas in the startup setup, you're brought in to do the thing you can do, and then you're kept doing it because you're most valuable, and that's not attractive. So you're constantly having to lose the talent you have, which again, forgive me, it's a statement rather than a question, but maybe it's a platform to speak.
I was talking to the president of the British Computing Society, and she said, you know, within no time at all, we're going to be having 80% shortage of tech capability that's coming out of the universities. You know, she's worried about how to get that tech capability of the students coming in and doing the courses. So we have to start with, I think, housing, co-locating, raising expectations, but I think also we should be designing in a much heavier tech component into our educational programme. You know, when I travelled around Australia, you know, I saw kids in schools there using 3D printers to print an arm with its muscles, with its nerves, as a way of understanding their biology lesson, right?
No, it's a long-term strategy, but we have to do it, and we need to get those technology skills into schools. We need people. We need teachers who actually understand technology to help train them, and we need businesses. And businesses now, I mean, they're, as James was saying, the great thing about the tech and the entrepreneurial revolution is that big businesses suddenly have discovered that actually they are really at risk now. Their business models are at risk. And so there is movement. There are businesses now. One of the things you'll find is a lot of big businesses now setting up their own little in-house venture funds, and they're actually trying to address these issues. But one of the things that they really do need to do is to get involved in their local communities, in the education of those local communities. Some have done it. Barclays have done some very good work in terms of helping on the educational side with Founders for Schools. You need much more. You need really, it should be right up at the sort of senior level of the British boardroom, which is, you know, how do we actually get involved in helping to change and shape the education system in this country. And I think it's just starting, but it needs to really accelerate.
So Matt, then Rosie, then Lucy.
Barriers to innovation. 1673, William Petty, the founder of economics, one of the founders of economics, said, pity the poor inventor. In the beginning, everybody was against him, and he has to run the court through the whole perpetual wins. Still true. The vested interest in incumbents is one of the problems, but also the over-interpretation of the precautionary principle, that basically anything new is held to a higher standard than anything else. I've been looking at the e-cigarette and its success in the UK compared with other European and indeed other countries in the world, to try and understand how that happened. And the answer is that very early on, through a chance meeting between Rory Sutherland and David Halpern, David Cameron was advised to reject the advice to be precautionary and against e-cigarettes, and that didn't happen in other countries. Incredible piece of luck, if you like, serendipity. James, you asked why is Europe so bad at this game. Isn't that the answer? On the whole, we are biased against the new. What can be done about it?
I think that one of the, because I've looked a lot at for various reasons, migration patterns over the centuries. And one of the things that meant that the US didn't have that is because the early European settlers that went to the US made money so fast that it became so prosperous that the psyche of the nation was forged by that. And therefore, if you're not having to protect, because there's just opportunity everywhere, and it becomes very much, well, you can just go and make it yourself. And that permeated, and I think still permeates the US to this day.
Peter Thiel has made the argument that the only place permissionless innovation still exists is in the digital world. And that's why most innovation is tech,
Yeah.
because it's so much, and that's getting less permissionless.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think if you look historically, Europe, it was too hard to make money, and because it was so hard to make money, you ended up protecting the wealth that you had, and that was protecting the incumbent, and that's what you were saying.
And it actually, when I found out about the panel and read the paper, and a lot of the policy issues were just outside of my kind of realm of understanding, but I started looking at some of the softer issues that I saw that affect the chance that you're talking about. And you know, the fact that the technology industry is somewhere like California, where people went out there and prospect for gold, and there was a high chance that you would fail, I think creates that kind of chance culture where I think a big part of Silicon Valley's success is that it embraces the fact that 95% of startups are going to be a failure. And so Saxenian actually wrote a book called Regional Advantage, that compared Boston and Silicon Valley, both who had a lot of government investment in the 50s and 60s in aerospace and defense, and kind of compared why Route 128 was not as successful as Silicon Valley. And indeed, one of the big issues was the fact that it was siloed. MIT favored big companies, Stanford favored small companies. Stanford encouraged people to start businesses themselves. The entire culture was just different, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that in Silicon Valley you're a rock star if you start a company, and in Boston you're crazy.
Saxenian.
Sorry, Rosie?
Saxenian. Yes. Regional advantage.
I had a follow-up question which was prompted by Pam's point, which I found very interesting, that you can't afford to pay your coders the 3 times that they would be paid in the US. Now, behind that, there must be something, which is, I mean, presumably the companies that they're working for, whether it's in Silicon Valley or something that's operating in a kind of P&L environment, but surely it's a question. Is it because the venture capitalists who are funding it have just got so much more money and are so much more tolerant of long-term lack of profitability, let's put it in black and white terms, that it just means that they're operating in a completely different way? And I guess that's a question also for Oliver, because you must have seen that those drivers operating. I mean, what's happening at that kind of finance level to make that possible?
No, I think you're right. And in fact, one of the problems in this country is actually access to capital after Series A, where you're actually looking at some of the bigger institutional rounds, where too often the sort of potential finances over here are looking at profitability and cash flow, whereas some of the American investors and ventures actually are looking for, they're looking for turnover growth, revenue growth. And actually they're prepared to fund people way into a 3-year period if they're going to amass, really it's critical mass, and we all know that for big companies, scalable companies, those are the absolutely key issues. Particularly in a fast-moving technological world, you need to actually get market share and critical mass. So it is a different way of looking at it, and it's a problem here because some of the smaller companies here find it very difficult to get that funding unless they've got a profit projection which looks attractive.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the point of big business and schools, which I thought was very interesting, because I wondered whether the problem was with big business or whether it was actually to do with the schools and the education system and the kind of fundamental suspicion of business that we have
through a kind of our education system, but also culturally in this country, and whether actually bringing big business into school could do something about that.
I think it's absolutely critical that it does. And I think we have got a problem in the schools. The sort of culture of schools has been, I think, too often anti-business. And I think that's been very damaging. And a lot of it goes back to the teachers who often feel threatened or uncomfortable with business, big business. So we have to try and change that. And I think what you've got to do is to, I think the figure which was really worrying to me was that 8% of school children actually get work placements. 8%. You know, this complete lack of connection between where people are going to end up working and their school education is hugely damaging and has to change. And businesses have to, I think, be at the forefront of that. Absolutely the forefront of it, because we all know the limitations of government. But businesses in their communities should be absolutely in the forefront of helping their local educational establishments.
There's a lot of deprofessionalisation of jobs now. You know, when you look at one of the big professional services firms that I work with, the amount of automation that's coming in to take away all the professions is incredible. And you know, one of the common conversations that I have with my 13-year-old, he says, he'll come home from school and we'll talk about what he's learnt, and he'll say, how on earth does this relate to your job, mummy? Right? And a lot of it doesn't. And some of it does need the foundation. But because he can't contextualise it and understand how to make meaning of it for when he goes into the world of work, he's highly dependent on me as a businesswoman being able to kind of shape it and be able to give him that influence and understanding. But kids don't see the relevance of a lot of stuff that they're learning. And academics, you know, I work a lot in the HE sector, you know, they fundamentally believe that about 40% of the curriculum that they're currently teaching at degree level today is of no use to business. But each academic pursues their own kind of area of interest and keeps their funding and their grants and their topics rolling and bringing kids onto it. You know, you need a real emphasis for development of the skills that we need.
Well, not to throw a sort of a wrench in the works here, but a lot of the big tech CEOs and senior executives at the major technology companies are sending their kids to Waldorf school where there's no screens and they don't, so I don't know. I mean, I think I think in 20 years we might know some of the answers about sort of how education, but the fact that those guys don't want their kids on screens is interesting.
Well, and of course, you know, what I mentioned about one of the key issues which people find there's a big lack of is social skills. You know, and, you know, social skills are really important because if as much computing and technology you do, if you can't communicate and work in teams. So it's not just about technology, it's about other skills, social skills, and leadership skills. So I think there's a big new, in my view, a new and radical change which we need to think about in terms of school curriculums.
Graham, and then.
Thank you. It's a fascinating discussion. It's really an observation that one thing we've not touched on is kind of the whole role of age and enterprise and kind of changing the culture there. I'm not thinking about just Bill Gates dropping out of Harvard instead of Microsoft. But there is that element, and he was brought home to me decisively recently. I was chairing a conference a while back about kind of technology and the economy. And as will become immediately obvious, I'm not really qualified to talk about this exactly, but I will nonetheless. There was a lady there who, a French starter, and basically this lady, in combination with some guys, had worked out this laser scanner facility which could very cheaply attach to your iPhone, and then it could scan your boobs, or the lady could scan her boobs, and she would get a perfectly fitting bra from this laser scanner. And she's got huge, clearly not qualified, but everybody in the room, wow, what an idea. This thing is explosive. But she's based in France, but she's moved to Shanghai because she meets the culture better in Shanghai than it is in Paris. Not quite sure what's to Shanghai. But the reason I mentioned her, the reason I include her, is because she was 20 years of age. She'd done that at 20. I mean, she's just got this unbelievable idea. She reckons she's got a survey from around the world that says 40% of women around the world say they wear it. That's quite a market. She's 20 years of age.
Yeah, but just on that, I mean, I think one of the key issues, there are lots of people with great ideas, and some of them are brilliant, but actually execution. And one of the problems we've had in this country is if you take some of the universities and some of the innovations come out of the universities, the translation into businesses has been a failure. So the innovation actually has often been taken back to America. And why is that? And the reason is very simple, and that is that some of these scientists have no idea how to run a company. So they're very good on the innovation, but they end up trying to run a company incompetently. And what is needed is you actually need people who can provide the right finance, and you need people who can provide the right advice, and you need people actually who can actually operate and build the business. And we've, unfortunately failed miserably in that area. So it's not just about the clever ideas, it's about the rest of that execution.
She's on the head to dwell on that, but she's very illustrative. She's done it. She had venture capital in there to develop the laser app and everything to go with it. She's got that functional. She's already selling up and selling. The reason she moved to Shanghai was she didn't think she could scale up as well in France, so she could scale up in Shanghai.
Well, give me her details, I'll put money into her.
There's a vital characteristic that when we go to all the various entrepreneur meetups, we talk about what's the thing that's allowed you to kind of keep on going when actually on the P&L the founder can't have a high salary. There's kind of a whole load of measures that there are, and one of the main characteristics is absolute grit. You need grit, you need more grit, and then you need even more. And it's the ability to just kind of stick with it and believe in yourself when actually you kind of go, there's just so many forces against you, you can just keep going. And I think that's one of the vital characteristics, that you can get the support that you need, but you've got absolute determination. And a bit of luck,
That's what we look for in our young entrepreneurs. Resilience and grit is probably, and drive and determination. Absolutely key, the key characteristics of people who will
How do you view previous failure?
Well, that's very important, and I think we're not, this country, I think it's getting better actually. It's getting much better. I mean, there is this whole, view that it's regarded as very damaging here, and you'll be ostracized if you failed. That's disappearing. People now, I think the entrepreneurial sort of ecosystem recognizes that actually failure is a learning experience, and so even funders now look at failure in a totally different way. So I think it's getting better, but it needs to go even more towards the American way of looking at it.
Just on that, your point about scaling, is there a cultural issue, do you think, in the UK here, that British entrepreneurs are more inclined to sort of sell out at a relatively early stage? Because an awful lot of businesses, very successful businesses, you see get taken out by private equity, or they sell out to big American companies. And I wonder whether in America, if you make 100 billion, you probably want to make $1 billion. I wonder, here, historically, you made your power and put out your country estate, and obviously things have moved on. But is there still that sort of?
I think there is a cultural problem. I think, one of the interesting things which has changed a little bit in my mind, particularly in the last 3 years, one of the really exciting things is a lot of these people, these young people I meet, are actually trying to build businesses because, not just to make a lot of money, actually they think it's going to be good for society, it's actually solving a particular problem in society. Some of them have got very good ethics. And those people in particular are ones who actually want to build a really big business. They want to actually grow it, to make it do something which is really game-changing in a positive way, and not just a sort of money-changing. And that, I think, is certainly out meeting some of those people is really is a real big positive. And I spend all my time trying to get people to say, you know, we've got to build a scalable business, something which is actually we can be proud of in this country. But it is a cultural problem.
I think you touched upon something that the reinvestment in the community and founders who have cashed out, reinvesting and starting private equity funds or being involved in venture capital is incredibly important to make sure that the next generation don't end up like those guys in Scotland. So I think culturally that's a very important point. I mean, I kind of thought about the ingredients that I thought Silicon Valley has. One of them, we talked about the embracement of failure. The other thing is education, where it's a continual learning environment. VC money, not just government money. Reinvestments from people who have gone down that road and have sold businesses or have gone public. I think it needs to be in an urban environment, and it needs to be somewhere with great quality of life. So I think if you look at those things, you know, London really ticks a lot of those boxes.
I think also you've got to be prepared to name what you want. So we're doing a raise at the moment, right? And I'm going around talking to all these different forms of investors. And what I've noticed is, you know, the conversation over the past 3-5 years has moved from, oh, we'd exit in 3 to 5 to 7 to potentially 10. But this is where part of the education comes in, because I sit in the room and say, do you know what? There's something really important that I want to do in my life. And whilst I'm prepared to sell the vast majority of it, I would hope to always retain some of it so that I can continue to be an architect in the design and the build and the curation of the type of knowledge that we want to then iterate back into the business. So, but you know, as young entrepreneurs, you know, I'm a businesswoman, I've worked in business, you know, I've done quite a few jobs, but young entrepreneurs, you're so desperate for cash, you'll almost sell anything, right? You know, so you're in this place where you just give away too much, because the only way you get to the next stage is to get your next lump of cash. So some of it comes
Success needs to come reasonably quickly. And if it doesn't, it can become more problematic.
You need confidence. You need someone to say it's okay for you to sit in a room and say, actually, you can ask for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at understanding term sheets and understanding how you can actually, as an entrepreneur, actually raise the cash but keep sweet equity in a serious way is quite important. And these are quite complex and difficult things, and particularly for, you know, scaling businesses in other parts of the country where there is much less sophistication. It's quite difficult for them, which is why I think these people in Scotland were taken to the cleaners. I mean, and that was just a very smart sort of term sheet, which KKR and others, with very sophisticated advisors, you know, persuaded them that this was the right thing to do, and of course it turned out to be a disaster.
Other questions?
Tim, you mentioned something which really brought to my mind about government now. Of course, you talk about Silicon Valley. I think one of the major successes, at least I come across quite frequently, is Palantir. And then you think about EQTEL. So what role, if any, does the panel see for government providing interesting backing or interesting capital to startups, and how do you make that work in more market-oriented societies?
Well, when you say Palantir has government investment or government contracts?
Well, I think isn't the track that Palantir grew out of some of the money that was put into EQTEL, and then which was then a sort of an incubator for them to come out of that. Is that, am I misremembering history?
No, you probably know it better than I, but I thought Palantir was growing because of the...
It certainly is milking the US government very happy.
I really wouldn't, I don't think I could answer that question very well.
I think government is, I mean, the British Business Bank is now putting a lot of money into, they put them into venture funds, which then invest them. So they end up actually allowing the market in terms of venture capitalists to invest their funds. And that actually, they've upped the ante on that, and they've supported, you know, the patient capital initiative. So I think there's a lot the government can do and should do in this area. But it has to be very careful about, it should use the private sector to basically deploy funds, so that trying to push funds in as government, civil servants trying to do that is, we all know, a disaster. But actually using the private sector to do that, I think, is hugely helpful.
You might be able to validate this number, James, but I was once talking to Sherry Kutu, and she was saying that 42% of finances come from Europe now. So, you know, so it's not as skewed towards money coming out of Silicon Valley. You know, entrepreneurs are getting almost 50, you know, equal funding from Europe.
Well, on that very positive note, ladies and gentlemen, please join us for lunch. It's just outside here. And then we're going to start again for the next session in 1 hour's time. And just leaves me to thank my panel, Oliver, Pam, Tim, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.